So, first up, picture this. I spent a summer a few years back working on this absolutely massive corn farm out in Nebraska, trying to scrape together some cash for college. I'm talking miles and miles of corn, taller than a grown man by August, just rustling and whispering in that endless prairie wind. It was back-breaking work, don't get me wrong, but mostly pretty peaceful. Except for old Captain Jack. That's what some of the older, more seasoned hands on the farm called this one particular scarecrow. It was way out in a remote section they called Field 17. A patch of land bordered by these dense, dark woods that nobody much liked going near. They'd say it had bad soil or that things just didn't grow right out there. Always some vague excuse. This scarecrow, Captain Jack, he wasn't your friendly, straw-stuffed Wizard of Oz type. No, sir. This thing was ancient. Looked like it was made of old, weathered fence posts and God knows what else. Dressed in these tattered, faded overalls and a wide-brimmed, beat-up old hat that cast its face in perpetual, deep shadow. And its eyes, it had these unsettling, mismatched button eyes. One bigger than the other, that seemed way too dark. Too knowing, like they'd seen things. The guys on the crew, they'd joke around, especially with us new guys, saying Captain Jack moved sometimes when no one was looking, or that he watched you work. Typical farmhand banter to spook the city kid. I figured at the time, just talk. I didn't pay it much mind at first, you know? Just another creepy old scarecrow in a creepy old field. But my duties, checking irrigation lines or mending fences after storms, sometimes took me out to Field 17, usually alone. And that's why I started to notice things, little things at first, the kind you second guess. One day, I swear on a stack of Bibles that Captain Jack's head was tilted slightly to the left, his shadowed gaze fixed on the dusty access road. The next day, it would be tilted just a fraction to the right, seeming to look out over the endless, rustling rows of corn. Coincidence, right? Had to be the wind or the way it was constructed on that old, creaky post. That's what I kept telling myself anyway. Then I started finding small, odd items near the base of the scarecrow's post, right where the dirt was always disturbed. A single, old-fashioned, tarnished metal button, the kind you might see on a work coat from 100 years ago. A small, brightly colored, but very worn and chipped, child's marble. A piece of faded red ribbon, tied in a neat little bow around a cornstalk right next to him. Now, these weren't things that would just blow in on the wind and land there so precisely. They felt placed. Deliberately, I asked one of the older hands, a quiet, weathered guy named Jeb who'd worked that farm his whole life, about it. He just shrugged, a strange, unreadable look in his faded blue eyes. Captain Jack gets visitors sometimes. I reckon, he said, his voice low. Or maybe he just collects things. Best to leave him to it. And he wouldn't say a word more, just clammed up. That just made it weirder. The feeling of being watched whenever I was in Field 17 grew stronger, almost palpable. It was a heavy, oppressive sensation, like unseen eyes boring into the back of my neck, making my skin prickle. I'd be working on a broken fence line, sweat dripping down my face, and I'd get this irresistible, almost compulsive urge to turn around to look at Captain Jack. He'd just be standing there, of course, motionless and silent in the blazing Nebraska sun, but his shadowed face under that wide, floppy hat. It always seemed to be aimed right at me, no matter where I was in the field. One afternoon, I was out there late, trying to finish a repair before a big thunderstorm rolled in. The sky was getting dark and bruised, the wind picking up, making the cornstalks rustle and sway like 1,000 whispering, gossiping voices. I was working with my back to Captain Jack, trying to ignore him. Suddenly, I heard a soft thud behind me, like something heavy but soft being dropped. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. Nothing, just a scarecrow, his tattered clothes flapping violently in the rising wind. But lying at its feet, something new, something that definitely hadn't been there minutes before. A small, crudely carved wooden bird, unpainted, but unmistakably a bird. It hadn't been there when I started working. I was absolutely sure of it. My heart started to pound like a drum. The wind couldn't have done that, couldn't have placed it so neatly. I backed away slowly, my eyes fixed on Captain Jack, half expecting him to lurch towards me. Did its head just twitch? No, impossible. Had to be the wind, the failing light playing tricks on my eyes. I grabbed my tools and got the hell out of Field 17 as fast as my legs could carry me. The feeling of those dark button eyes burning into my back every step of the way. I tried to tell myself there was a rational explanation for all of it. Maybe one of the other, more mischievous farmhands was messing with me, playing an elaborate prank on the city kid. Or maybe some local eccentric, someone who lived out in the nearby woods, had a strange, sentimental attachment to that old scarecrow, leaving it little gifts, moving it around. That seemed more plausible, more comforting than a moving, watching, gift-receiving scarecrow. But the gifts kept appearing, and they started to get more personal, more unsettling, almost like a narrative. One day, it was a small, faded, sepia-toned photograph of a family I didn't recognize, clearly from a much older era, the 1920s maybe, tucked carefully into the scarecrow's tattered overall pocket. Another time, a single child-sized muddy leather work boot placed carefully, almost reverently, beside its supporting post. It felt like someone or something was trying to tell me a story, a very sad, very creepy, unspoken story. Or maybe they were just marking their territory, letting me know in no uncertain terms that they were the real watchers of Field 17, and I was the intruder. The real kicker, the thing that made me swear off Field 17 for good, came one evening. I'd foolishly left my favorite, most expensive wrench out in Field 17 earlier that day, in my haste to get away from another weird feeling. I had to go back for it as dusk was settling, the sky turning a bruised purple. The air was dead still, no wind at all. As I approached Captain Jack, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, I saw it. The wrench. My wrench. It was clutched firmly, impossibly, in one of the scarecrow's straw and stick hands, held out as if offering it back to me. I didn't take it. I just stood there, frozen to the spot, my blood running cold as ice water. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't the wind. How in God's name? As I stood there, paralyzed with a mixture of terror and disbelief, I heard a soft sound from the dense, dark corn rows directly behind the scarecrow. A rustle of stalks, like something moving stealthily. Then a low, guttural chuckle, a distinctly human chuckle. I didn't wait to see who it was. I didn't care. I turned and ran, faster than I've ever run in my life, not even looking back, leaving the wrench, leaving everything. I told Gary, the farm foreman, what happened, babbling about the wrench, the chuckle. He listened, his usually jovial face grim and unreadable in the dim light of the bunkhouse. He didn't laugh. He just nodded slowly and said, "Some fields are best left alone after dark, son. And some scarecrows, well, maybe they ain't just out there to scare the birds away." He quietly reassigned me to other fields further away from the woods after that, and never mentioned Field 17 again. I never found out for sure who or what was out there in that field, using that creepy old scarecrow. Was it someone living rough out in those woods? A recluse who saw Captain Jack as a companion? Or a guardian for their territory? Was it someone with a much darker purpose, using it as a drop point for something illegal, or a signal, or just a very effective way to unnerve anyone who got too close to whatever secrets Field 17 held. The items, the wrench in its hand, the chuckle, it felt like a very deliberate, very human intelligence at work, using the local folklore, the creepy old Scarecrow, as a tool for their own ends. When I told my friends back home this story later that year, they all said, "No way, man, that's just too crazy. You were just tired from all that farm work, working too hard, letting your imagination run wild." Nobody really believed the details, the sheer, calculated, escalating creepiness of it all. But I know what I saw. And I know that feeling of being watched by those mismatched button eyes wasn't just in my head. Sometimes, the most ordinary objects in the most ordinary places can be touched by something unsettlingly human and deeply wrong. And some watchers don't need real eyes to see you or to let you know you're not welcome. However fall, those big farms out in the Midwest, especially in states like Iowa or Illinois, set up those massive, elaborate corn mazes for the Halloween season. They're a lot of fun, especially if you go at night with just flashlights. My friends and I, we were in college near Des Moines, Iowa at the time, and there was this one particular farm old man, McGregor's place, that had the biggest, most complicated, most legendary corn maze in at least 3 counties. It was famous. And, of course, like any good local landmark, it had its own set of stories, its own folklore. People said it was incredibly easy to get genuinely, seriously lost in McGregor's maze. That the paths seemed to shift and change when you weren't looking. That sometimes you'd hear strange, disembodied music, or feel like you were being followed even when you were absolutely sure you were alone. Most people just laughed it off as part of the Halloween fun, the spooky atmosphere that McGregor's deliberately cultivated. So, one crisp, clear October night, about a week before Halloween, me and my then girlfriend Sarah and another couple we hung out with, Ben and Lisa, decided to brave McGregor's infamous Moonlight Maze. It was supposed to be extra spooky that year. They'd added new sections. We'd paid our money at the little wooden booth, got our flimsy little complimentary flashlights that barely cut through the darkness, and plunged into the towering rows of dry, rustling corn, full of bravado and cheap beer. The corn was incredibly tall that year, easily 10 or 12 feet high, forming these dense, claustrophobic, rustling walls on either side of the narrow, twisting dirt paths. The paths themselves were confusing, intentionally so, with lots of dead ends and looping trails designed to get you thoroughly lost. After about half an hour of laughing and deliberately trying to get separated and then finding each other again, we realized we actually were lost. Genuinely. Properly lost. And somehow, in the confusion and the darkness, Sarah and I had gotten completely separated from Ben and Lisa. Ben, Lisa, you guys out there? I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. My voice sounded flat, strangely absorbed by the thick, dry rows of corn. Only the incessant, whispering rustling of the corn stalks in the slight night breeze answered. "Don't worry," I told Sarah, trying to sound much more confident than I actually felt, giving her arm a squeeze. "We'll find them. Or we'll find one of the emergency exits. It's a maze, that's the whole point, right? To get a little lost." She didn't look convinced. We picked a path at random and started walking, our weak flashlight beams bobbing ahead of us. The moon was bright that night, a real harvest moon, but down in a maze between those towering walls of corn. It was mostly deep shadows and the narrow, dancing, insufficient beams of our flashlights. It was quiet. Too quiet. The usual distant sounds of the farm, The faint country music from the speakers near the entrance, the laughter and shrieks of other groups in the maze, seemed to have faded away completely, as if we'd stepped into another dimension. Then Sarah grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in. "Mark, did you hear that?" She whispered, her voice tight with sudden fear. I stopped, listened intently, holding my breath. And I heard it too. A faint, lilting, almost mournful melody. A flute. A simple, almost childlike tune, seeming to drift through the silent cornstalks from somewhere ahead of us, perhaps to our left. It was strangely beautiful, ethereal, but also completely out of place. Who the hell would be playing a flute in the middle of a corn maze at night? Maybe it's part of the haunted attraction, Sarah suggested, her voice still a whisper, though she didn't sound at all convinced by her own words. Like, piped in spooky music to add to the atmosphere? Could be, I guess, I said, trying to sound reassuring. But it didn't sound like a recording. It sounded live, with little imperfections, little breaths, and it seemed to be beckoning. The melody would play a few clear, sweet notes, then pause, then play again, a little further away, a little more insistent, as if inviting us, luring us to follow. Against my better judgment, because what else were we going to do? Stand there lost in the dark, we started to walk slowly towards the sound of the flute. The path twisted and turned, a confusing labyrinth. The music would fade as we rounded a bend, then reappear, always seeming to be just around the next corner, leading us deeper and deeper. Into the heart of the maze, further and further from where we thought the entrance or any conceivable exit might be. The feeling of being deliberately lured, of being played with, was growing stronger with every step. This wasn't just random music. This felt intelligent, purposeful. The local stories about McGregor's maze. The ones about people getting truly lost for hours or hearing strange, unexplainable things suddenly didn't seem so amusing, so harmless. We came to a small circular clearing in the corn, a definite dead end. The flute music stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was heavy, oppressive, almost deafening after the melody. "Okay, this is officially beyond creepy," Sarah said, her voice trembling a little now, her flashlight beam shaking in her hand. "Let's just try to backtrack, get out of here." As we turned to leave the clearing, we both saw it at the same time, illuminated by the combined light of our flashlights. Tucked into the base of the corn stalks at the very edge of the clearing, almost hidden by the shadows, was a small, crudely made corn husk doll. It was about 6 inches tall, with buttons for eyes and a shock of dried corn silk for hair. And around its neck was a little necklace made of dried dark red berries. Berries that looked disturbingly exactly like the ones Sarah had been admiring on a decorative bush near the maze entrance earlier that evening before we went in. Sarah gasped and grabbed my arm again, her nails digging into my skin. "Mark, that's like the berries I was looking at. How?" This was too much. This wasn't a prank by the farm owners, not this specific. Someone was watching us. Someone knew we were here. Someone who could move through this maze with an unnerving silent ease, leaving these creepy, personalized tokens. Then the flute music started again, this time from behind us, back the way we'd just come, as if trying to block our retreat or to lure us into a different, even more confusing section of the maze. It sounded closer now, more insistent, almost mocking. "We need to get out of here, Sarah, right now," I said, my voice grim, trying to control the panic rising in my own chest. "Forget the damn path. We're just going to push through the corn, straight in the direction we think the main road is. Come on." It was tough, brutal going. The corn stalks were thick, dry, scratching our faces and arms, tearing at our clothes. It was dark, disorienting. We kept stumbling over unseen ruts in the ground. But the thought of that flute, that doll with Sarah's berries, and whoever or whatever was behind it spurred us on. We could still hear the flute music, sometimes seeming very close, just a few rows over, sometimes further away, a mocking, ethereal, the wisp melody that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once, always just out of reach, always leading. After what felt like an absolute eternity of crashing and stumbling through the dense, suffocating corn, we finally burst out of the edge of the maze. Not an official exit, but onto a muddy, rutted tractor path that ran alongside the main field. We were scratched, dirty, hearts pounding, terrified, but blessedly out. We didn't see Ben and Lisa until we got all the way back to the main entrance area, near the warmth and light of the big bonfire the farm had going. They'd found their way out easily, they said, about 20 minutes after we got separated. Hadn't heard any flute music, hadn't seen anything unusual at all. They looked at us like we were completely crazy or drunk. When we babbled our story about the music, the doll, the feeling of being herded, of being toyed with. Dude, you guys just got seriously spooked by the maze. That's all, Ben said, laughing. Though he stopped when he saw how genuinely shaken we were. McGregor probably has some hidden speakers out there playing that creepy flute music to add to the Halloween atmosphere. And the doll, some little kid probably dropped it earlier. You just let your imaginations run wild. No one believed us. Not really. They thought we'd just gotten hopelessly lost and scared ourselves silly. But Sarah and I, we knew what we'd experienced. That flute music wasn't recorded, we were sure of it. That doll with those specific berries wasn't accidental. Someone was in that maze with us that night. Someone who was playing a very dangerous, very personal, very creepy game. Was it just some local weirdo, a recluse who lived nearby and got his kicks from terrifying people in the maze each year? Or was it something more sinister? Part of some strange rural ritual, given the corn husk doll and the almost hypnotic otherworldly music? We never found out. We didn't stick around to ask. We didn't go back to McGregor's Moonlight Maze, needless to say. And for a long time after that, the sound of a flute, any flute, would send an involuntary shiver down my spine. It taught me that sometimes even in a place designed for harmless fun, for a bit of a thrill, you can stumble into someone else's private, creepy, unsettling world. A world where you're not a customer, but an unwilling participant in their game. And when no one believes your experience, when they try to rationalize away your genuine fear, it just makes the memory and the lingering, unanswered mystery even more unsettling, even more isolating. This story happened to my grandmother, but it's one she told me many times when I was a kid, and it always gave me the absolute creeps because it felt so real, so possible. She grew up on a small, incredibly isolated farm in the Oklahoma Panhandle back in the Dust Bowl days. The 1930s. It was a hard life and lonely. Let's call my grandmother Carol for this, though that wasn't her real name. Carol and her younger brother, Billy, who was maybe 6 at the time, used to walk home from their little one-room schoolhouse every afternoon. Their route, the only route, took them across a vast, empty stretch of prairie, mostly uncultivated, sun-baked land covered in tall, dry, yellow grass that in late summer would be well over their little heads. It was about a 2-mile walk, and usually they weren't scared. It was just open country, the sky huge and empty above them. But there were always vague, stern warnings from their parents, delivered with a seriousness that brooked no argument. You stick to the path now, you hear? Don't go wandering off into that tall grass for any reason. And if you see any strangers, anyone at all you don't know, you turn right around and run straight home. You hear me? Strangers were rare out there in that desolate landscape, but not unheard of. Drifters, mostly. Desperate men who'd lost their farms, moving from place to place looking for work, or sometimes for trouble. One particularly hot, still oppressive afternoon, Carol and Billy were making their slow way home from school. The sun beating down mercilessly, the dry grass rustling faintly in the almost non-existent hot breeze. They were about halfway across the big empty field, the tallest grass rising like a yellow wall on either side of their narrow, dusty, worn path. Carol said she suddenly got that prickly feeling on the back of her neck. That sixth sense kids sometimes have. That acute awareness that they weren't alone, that someone was watching them. She glanced around, casually at first, not wanting to alarm Billy. Nothing but the endless waving grass and the vast, pale, unforgiving blue sky. Then she saw him, way out in the field, maybe 100 yards or so off the path, standing perfectly. Unnaturally still amongst a thick patch of taller grass was a figure. A man. He was tall, very tall, and dressed in dark, drab, shapeless clothing that made him blend in eerily with the shadows and the parched, brown-yellow earth. He was too far away to see his face clearly, but he was unmistakably looking right at them. Just standing there, absolutely motionless, watching. Billy, who was younger and usually oblivious to anything beyond his own small world, hadn't seen him. Carol didn't say anything at first, not wanting to scare her little brother into hysterics. She just quickened her pace a little, almost imperceptibly, tugging gently on his small, sweaty hand. "Come on, Billy," she said, trying to keep her voice light and playful. "Let's race you to that big ol' tumbleweed up ahead." But as they moved, Carol risked another quick, fearful glance back towards where she'd seen the man. He was still there, but he wasn't just standing still anymore. He was moving too. Not directly towards them, not yet, not running, but moving parallel to the path they were on, keeping pace with them, half hidden by the tall, swaying grass, sometimes disappearing for a moment as he moved through a thicker patch, then reappearing a little further along, always maintaining that same unnerving, deliberate distance, always, she felt with a sickening certainty, watching them. It was like a coyote stalking prairie dogs, patient, silent, relentless, just waiting for the right moment. A cold, visceral fear, the kind that little kids feel deep in their bones, started to grip Carol. This wasn't just a random person out for a walk in the middle of nowhere. This felt wrong. This felt predatory. This felt like danger. "Billy," she whispered, her voice tight and urgent. "We need to run. We need to run home. As fast as you can. Don't ask why. Just run, and don't look back." Billy, finally sensing the raw, undisguised fear in her voice, in her grip on his hand, looked up at her, his own eyes suddenly wide with a dawning terror. He didn't ask why. He just started running, his little legs pumping as fast as they could go on the dusty, uneven path. Carol ran with him, her own heart hammering at her chest like a trapped bird, constantly, compulsively glancing over her shoulder, despite her own warning to Billy. The man in the field was still there, still moving parallel to them. A dark, loping, persistent shadow in the tall grass. He wasn't running, not yet, but he was definitely keeping pace with their increased speed, effortlessly. He never got closer, but crucially, he never fell further behind either. He was just there. A silent, persistent, utterly terrifying presence on their flank. It felt like an absolute eternity, that desperate run across the hot, dusty, seemingly endless field, the dry grass, scratching at their bare legs, the merciless sun beating down on their heads in that silent, shadowy figure keeping pace with them in the periphery of Carol's vision. Carol said she was sure that at any moment he would suddenly change direction, cut them off, emerge from the grass right in front of them, blocking their path to safety. They finally burst out of the edge of the field onto the familiar, dusty dirt track that led to their small, weathered farmhouse. Still a good quarter of a mile away, but visible now, a beacon of hope. They didn't stop running, didn't dare until they slammed breathlessly through the rickety screen door into the relative safety of their kitchen, collapsing in a heap on the cool linoleum floor, gasping for breath, terrifying their mother, who was kneading dough at the big wooden table. When Carol, between ragged sobs and gasps, managed to tell her mother what had happened, what she'd seen out in the field, her mother's usually calm face went pale with a fear Carol had rarely seen. She grabbed her husband's old, loaded shotgun from its place above the fireplace and went out with Carol's father, who had just come in from the barn to scan the vast, empty fields. They saw nothing, of course. No sign of anyone. Just the endless, indifferent, waving grass under the vast, empty Oklahoma sky. Later that evening, when Carol tried to tell her father again about the man, about how he'd silently, relentlessly followed them, he was, as men often were back then, skeptical, trying to rationalize it away. Now, Carol May, he said gently, stroking her hair, are you absolutely sure you weren't just seeing things? The sun out here plays tricks on your eyes sometimes, out in those tall fields. Might have just been a shadow moving or a big old tumbleweed rolling along, or maybe just some poor fella looking for water and you got spooked by him. Her younger brother, Billy, hadn't even clearly seen the man at all, just reacted to Carol's obvious terror and urgency. So in the end, it was just Carol's word against the emptiness of the prairie. No one else in their small, tight-knit farming community really believed her story either. Not fully. They'd heard tales of drifters passing through, sure, but a man silently stalking two small children across an open field in broad daylight? It sounded too movie-like, too dramatic for their hard-scrabble, practical lives. Probably just a misunderstanding, dear, the preacher's wife had said kindly, but dismissively at church the next Sunday. The Lord looks after his little lambs. But Carol knew what she saw. She knew that man was real and that his intentions were not good at all. The way he moved, the way he watched them, it was predatory. It wasn't a shadow. It wasn't her imagination. It was a man and he was hunting. After that day, Carol never walked home from school across that field alone again, or even with just Billy. Her father, despite his outward skepticism, made sure of it, either meeting them himself or sending one of the older farmhands. The offense here was never completed, thankfully. But the intent, the silent, terrifying stalking of two vulnerable children by an unknown, shadowy man in an isolated, exposed place was terrifyingly real to Carol, and the feeling of not being believed, of having her genuine, life-altering fear dismissed as childish fancy or an overactive imagination, that stayed with my grandmother for the rest of her life. She said it taught her that the most dangerous monsters are always the human ones, the ones who can hide in plain sight. In the waving grass of an ordinary Oklahoma field, their intentions as dark and hidden as their shadowed faces. And sometimes a child's fear or a child's instinct is the truest, most reliable warning of all.